Okay, this is a lecture called Obesity, Causes of Obesity. It's going to be in 9 parts, so this was just the first part. And as it starts out here, a lot of women are a little bit on the heavy side, men too, but we'll start out talking about women, and they're looking like Mona Lisa, and they're hoping they could be more slender like Venus. And the good news is we can help with that. I've gone through all the literature on obesity, and I think I understand it as well as it can be understood now. And there's lots of things you can do that will help you. So give this a chance, and I think you'll be real happy. It's going to help you to improve your body weight. Okay, here is this lovely painting called The Lifeline by Winslow Homer. And what I like about The Lifeline, to me, that's really eating starch. If you don't know what to do, you're not sure how to start out on a 100% vegan diet, just eat starch. Starch is another word for complex carbohydrate, and the best ones are potatoes, sweet potatoes, and rice. The reason I say that is those are all about 1% fat. 1% of the calories are from fat. The lower the percent of calories from fat, the faster a person loses weight. So you eat those things, man, you'll be surprised how fast the weight comes off. Other starches include things like lentils. Those are about 3% fat. A lot of the other beans are in the ballpark 4 to 5% fat, so they're all quite low fat. Now, some of the grains, things like oatmeal is about 16%. Quinoa, I think it was about 15% fat, something like that. All of those things will help you to lose weight. I would consider below 10% to be very low fat. Garbanzo beans are a little heavier. They're also called chickpeas. They're about 13% fat, but these are all still really good foods. Just to give you a comparison, meat is a terrible food. I mean, even the lowest fat, leanest meats are typically about 25% fat. So I'm going to recommend zero meat, none, zero oil. Okay, we'll get to all that in just a moment. But anyways, your lifeline to cling to while you're trying to figure out the rest of this vegan diet is eat starch. And this is a beautiful painting. A woman being saved. Okay, next thing is, what are we talking about? Definition of an obesity is a body mass index of greater than 30. Okay, so body mass index is just your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. And again, obese, greater than 30 BMI. Normal BMI is less than 25. And I can tell you, only the vegans in the modern world tend to have a BMI less than 25. You can see the obesity in the United States has really taken off since 1980. This is called like a hockey stick curve. Basically, it just dramatically accelerates in an upward slope after 1980. So a good question to ask is, what's new since 1980? What has also really increased since 1980? And there's multiple things. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Oils actually started coming up in the 1960s after Ansel Keys really put the stigma on saturated fat in the 1950s, came up with a old-fashioned version of the Mediterranean diet, which was primarily a vegetarian diet in those days. We're going to talk about it. The modern vegetarian diet, modern Mediterranean diet's a joke. You don't want to do that. But just so you know, in the 1960s, they said, oh, sat fat's bad because of what Ansel Keys said. So they started having a lot more of these cooking oils, and that turned out to also be a disaster. We'll talk about that in a moment. Nowadays in America, as of around 2020, more than 40% of people are obese. Okay, we're going to talk about a lot of really important things. One thing, though, we got to talk about is, why do women have big butts? And the reason women have big butts is because it's an energetically efficient place for them to carry omega-3 fats. Omega-3 fats are very important for the baby's development. Because of the bends in the fatty acid tail at the sites of double bonds, they help to fluidize the plasma cell membrane. Saturated fat at room temperature is solid, whereas PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, are liquid at room temperature. Okay, you can put them in the refrigerator and they stay liquid. So they help to fluidize plasma cell membranes, and that's thought to accelerate, speed up neuronal conduction, which is all a good thing. That's not the same as adults needing omega-3s, because adults, your brain cells are pretty much the same from when you're a baby, your neurons, as when you're an old adult. They don't turn over too much. That's why you can remember things from your childhood. Okay, so anyways, why do women have big butts? As she stores the omega-3s in her gluteal regions and her upper thighs, that makes those areas a little more prominent. It's just energetically efficient to carry the extra weight there. Also, it's a female peacock display of fertility because she typically will have a narrow waist when she's not pregnant. Our ancestors, there was like almost no one was fat from their diet. And because of that, to our ancestors, let's say thousands of years ago, when a woman was fat, that meant she was pregnant. So basically the way this works in our subconscious male mind, deep in our id, our brainstem, every guy will tell you this, he can't help it. When he sees a woman, his body immediately determines, does she look fertile or not? And what makes her look fertile is her butt's relatively big compared to her waist. And guys can't help it. We're programmed to be attracted to that. We just automatically are. And I think the reason is anytime a man romantically approaches a woman, it's dangerous. Okay, her father, her husband, her boyfriend, her brother, her cousin, they could all beat you up, kick your butt, okay? So the subconscious mind, I think, says to a man, why risk romantically approaching a woman if there's no chance of having a baby with her? And we just can't help it, but we're not attracted to fat women. We're just not. I talk to guys all the time. They don't care about your deodorant. They don't care about 99% of the things you care about. But if you're fat, we're just not attracted to it. Okay, female also has a little bit wider pelvis to deliver a baby with a big head, as human babies have big heads because we got big brains. Women have a little bit smaller shoulders, and that's because they don't need that much physical strength. They just need enough to control a boy, one of their sons, until he hits puberty and he's ready to go off with the men and do whatever the men do in that culture or society. Women tend to have less body hair, and that's an attractive thing. It's a display of, I think, it's thought evolutionarily, look, no parasites, how healthy I am. And perhaps women are more highly evolved than men. On the other hand, though, it does seem to me that my wife's family might have evolved from apes, but mine was created in the image of God. Why am I giving this lecture? You know, my male doctor friends ask me, you know, does writing books and giving lectures help you to make money or get laid? And I said no. And they said, well, then why do you do it? And the reason I do it, because it's a great thing. It really helps people. I find this stuff fascinating to study. It's the most powerful thing in all of health and medicine. It's just incredible stuff. Most disease comes from diet and toxicology. So those subjects are well worth knowing if you want to help yourself and help other people. Okay, summary of the entire lecture. When you eat starches, fruits, and vegetables, everything good happens in human metabolism and physiology. When you eat meat and dairy and sweets and oils and processed food and caffeine, everything bad is happening. Okay, obesogens are mostly estrogenic chemicals. All right, these are chemicals that make you fat. The guy Bruce Bloomberg, the PhD scientist, he's the one who coined that term, obesogens, and he wrote a pretty good book too. His book's called Obesogens. Anyways, most of them are estrogenic chemicals, and the reason estrogenic chemicals cause a person to gain weight is because they're a fat storage hormone, estrogen and estrogen-like chemicals. Because a woman would have to gain weight before she's having a baby, because the baby might need that extra weight for energy. Our ancestors always worried about starvation. They didn't have all the food available that we have nowadays. Psychological stress also contributes to obesity because in the initial phase of stress, it's more of the catecholamines, adrenaline, noradrenaline, for example, to energize you to deal with that immediate physical stress. But chronic prolonged psychological stress and other forms of stress manifest primarily as increased cortisol, which is bad because it makes you get fatter, especially it puts on visceral fat, the worst type of fat. Okay, here's a beautiful painting. This is by Thomas Cole. It's called The Voyage of Life. It's a story painting. This is part one. Here's the baby, comes out of the birth canal. There's the guardian angel, mama, right next to him, a time of abundance and joy and hope. And it's just sort of a beautiful spring morning. Here's part two of The Voyage of Life by Thomas Cole, done in about the 1830s. This is youth. And the young man has determined, made up his mind that this is his destiny, his ideal future paradise in the sky, and he's going to go for it. He's leaning forward. He's got all his testosterone maxed out, and it's a straight path, it seems, to it. But the beauty of this painting is, as you can see, the river is going to go around a bend, and as it goes around the bend, it starts heading downhill. The velocity starts increasing. Now there's rocks around there, and that's when he starts getting into the realities of middle age. And by the way, I love this painter, Thomas Cole. He's from the Hudson River School, and I think he's the best story painter that ever lived. And this Voyage of Life is one of my favorite series of paintings. There's so many clever little details in it. If you look at the clouds almost look like they're coming towards this poor middle-aged guy. So here he is in middle age. The oars have fallen out of the boat. He's headed for the rapids. He's afraid the boat's going to smash on the rocks. Guardian angel mama is far away. He's on his own right now. Who knows what's going on with his health? Is the Johnson still working? Is the marriage still working? Is he still working at his job? It can be pretty tough and scary midlife crisis in more ways than one. So anyways, this is where a lot of people find themselves. Middle-aged, they're fat, they're having health problems, and they're hoping it's possible to turn it around. He's saying a little prayer here. Okay, so another thing too, meat eaters, standard American diet eaters, they're much worse off. And so many of our friends who've gone down the road of eating the sad diet, meat diets and all this, the men routinely are impotent. It's at least 60% by 60 years of age, 50% by 50 years of age, 40% by 40 years of age. I can tell you, I know lots of guys are asking me for Viagra, when they're only about 40 years of age. It's frightening how common this is. So here's an example. A lot of men notice once they go to a vegan diet that their Johnson starts working a lot better, kind of almost comes back to life for many of them. And, out of consideration for them, I've written an impotence prayer. I'm going to share that with you. Our Father, who art in boner land, solid wood be thy name. Give us this day our daily boner, and forgive us our dietary sins, as we forgive those who misdiet against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from impotence. Amen. Okay, now another beautiful painting. This one is Copernicus, done by Jan Matejko in 1872. And so the Copernicus moment, the big dramatic realization is, and this is something that most doctors don't have any time in their life until maybe, hopefully, in their 50s. I had it sooner than that because I got fat and because my parents were sick, but here it is. Learning to see that most diseases are not idiopathic. Idiopathic means the doctor's an idiot and the patient's pathetic. And they're not genetic. There's this tremendous overemphasis on disease being genetic because there's a lot of money in that. If you tell the patient it's genetic, that means there's nothing you could do about it. You tell them it's idiopathic, nobody knows the cause. Again, that implies there's nothing can be done about it. But once you realize the vast majority of diseases, at least 70% and perhaps closer to 80%, Dr. McDougall and T. Colin Campbell would push towards this 80% number. That means you could change your diet, you could avoid toxins, so you have a much better chance of preventing disease and reversing disease when you understand it. So I call that a Copernican moment. That's like one of the most important things anyone could possibly know about health, and hardly anyone knows it. Because once you know this, you realize your health, your fate, it's not in your doctor's hands, hardly ever. It's in your hands as an individual patient. And of course, the people bring up, but what about standard of care guidelines and all that? Yeah, that is totally true. But the standard of care guidelines in medicine are written based on the average person who's functionally illiterate, lazy, unmotivated, and unwilling to change their diet. And that's how most people are. So they can only get the lowest common denominator of standard of care. But for anybody who's intelligent, willing to read, willing to try to learn, watch medical videos, nutrition videos online, change their diet and other habits, they can do way better than the standard of care. What they want is optimal care, optimal results. Okay, now I love this painting here. This is called Reception at the Court of Versailles by Jean-Léon Gérôme. Okay, so why do I show you this? Because, and by the way, we're going to get into all kinds of biochemistry and a lot more complicated stuff, but I like to first of all sort of build up the philosophy that put everything into a big picture and makes sense, an overview. And basically, this is what it's like to be a vegan doctor or a vegan patient, a vegan person. Because what ends up happening is all of society is going to be different than you. So you have to be mentally strong and nonconformist. Just like our physiologies of a herbivore, and a herbivore sits in the, wants to be in the middle of the pack, conformist, kind of lazy and stupid. When you become a vegan, you're so much different than everyone else that you have to be nonconformist. And it's good to understand why you do what you do so that when people criticize you, mock you, tease you, you can defend yourself. And you'll see the truth is totally on your side. It's amazing how strong the truth supports the vegan diet. But I thought this was a pretty cool painting, in the Court of Versailles with King Louis there. So anyways. Oh, okay. Also, I talked about starch being a lifeline to cling to until we figure out the rest of the details. Dr. McDougall says people should eat 90% of their calories from starch. That's 90%. A lot of other nutrition experts, Chef AJ will ballpark it, from about 50 to 90%, and I would probably put it in about that same range as well. Some of it depends, on how often you exercise. A lot of these people who exercise a lot, you'll see all these marathoners, triathletes, and all that. Many of them are eating more than 50% of their calories from fruit. There's a catch with fruit, though. It has a lot of fructose in it. We're going to talk about that in a future lecture. In addition, fruit's quite expensive. So there's another downside of it. All right. The vegan movement needs some songs. So just a quick version of a song that can be adapted to the vegan movement. Amazing Starch. Okay. Amazing Starch, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was fat, but now I'm thin. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas starch that taught my arteries to flow, and starch my blockages relieved. How precious did that starch appear the hour I first believed. I love that song, and my favorite version of it is the one sung by Judy Collins. It's just beautiful. I love the bagpipe version, too, by the Scottish Dragoons is what they call them. It's beautiful. Okay, why are the Nauru the fattest people in the world? So these are some of the men in Nauru. This is an old picture from 1914, and they were skinny and healthy. Nauru is this little island, 21 kilometers squared. It's just north of Australia. Got about 7,000 people. It turns out the birds that pooped on their island put a lot of valuable phosphate into the soil. And then these Western mining companies came over to Nauru and made a deal with their rulers that they could mine the soil for phosphate. And Nauru was declared the richest country in the whole world in 1982 per capita. But they mined out 90% of the land. They lost all their farmland. So all their food had to be brought in as processed food from the Western countries. Guess what happened? They're now the fattest people in the world. So here's the mining. They're mining out all the phosphate from the soil, destroying all the farmland in Nauru. They took 90% of the land. And here's a more recent picture of Nauru population. Very fat. The average adult weighs 220 pounds. So that's rather sad. So now they've got this small island with very little farmland on it. They're eating all this processed food, getting fat and diabetic. 72% are obese, 40% with diabetes. And to destroy all your farmland, that's a recipe for extinction. We can then take a look here. This is the Easter Island statues on the island. Easter Island is also called Rapa Nui, and that's a good name to remember just because we're going to later on be talking about mTOR, mammalian target of rapamycin, also called mechanistic target of rapamycin, and that has to do with the human body's nutrient sensing pathways, and it relates to obesity in a big way. And also, this is a little bit of a lesson, a cautionary tale for Americans. Are we headed to the same sort of fate as the people of Easter Island, as potentially the fate of the people in Nauru? America, wise up before it's too late, before we're all fat and sick and infertile and impotent. Okay, so that is the end of part 1 of obesity.